Hey, eighth graders, welcome to Solar Astronomy Notes. You've been doing some reading today on different topics in regards to the sun, and we're going to highlight a couple items here as we go through our notes. So open up your notebook, take out your notebook on whatever style of notes that you enjoy taking, whether it's our Cornell notes, whether it is your bubble notes, probably freehand notes might work best for today. All righty, looking with the sun. Our sun contains 99.86% of all of the mass in the entire solar system. So you add up all of the planets, which you've learned about, all of the asteroids, all of the other particles within the sun or the solar system, and 99.86% of everything is in the sun itself. Okay, that's the same as 332,950 Earths. That's how much mass there is inside the sun. You would need that many Earths in order to equal that same amount of mass. As we look at the average density, this is kind of a misleading number because there's parts of the sun that are not very dense at all, but it's the core that is 100 times more dense than water. And that's where the sun gets its gravity from, is that tremendous amount of density inside the core of our sun. If you need to stop the notes at any time, stop the playback here at any time, you certainly can as you go for copying down your notes today. As you look at a picture through the sun, obviously we never want you to look at the sun directly unless you have the proper solar filters. There are special lenses designed for looking at the sun. And you never want to just use a regular pair of sunglasses or your naked eye or anything like that. If you offer some filtering for the sun, you can see some features here from the surface. You see some areas that are very bright and white, and what you learned about last time was that stars that are white tend to be hotter temperature stars. So here you see that white area on our sun. You can see that that is an area that is hotter than areas around it. You can also see some explosions and some things coming off from the surface of the sun. We're going to talk about those shortly. You can also see areas that are a little bit darker in color, and those are areas that are actually cooler on the surface of the sun. As you look at the sun itself, our sun, remember, is only one in over 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. As you look at the sun itself, it's a unique little feature on our sun actually has a pulse. It actually has a heartbeat, if you will. They call it the solar pulse. And every 2 hours and 40 minutes, the sun expands and contracts by about 6 miles. And you can basically set your watch to it. So the sun has a solar pulse where it expands and contracts about 6 miles every 2 hours and 40 minutes. You can see the picture on the slide here. You can see that there's a lot more energy on the sun. There's some areas that are even darker than the previous slide that we showed you of the sun. Give you a moment to finish copying this down. When you get to a cross-section or anatomy of the sun is made up of different layers. Okay, so we'd like you to copy this diagram out. Use a good portion of your paper in order to copy this down. You can either just do the 90-degree cutout of it, or try to use your artistic creativeness in drawing this. Inside we have the core. That's where the nuclear fusion is happening. That's where hydrogen is combining with hydrogen to form helium. That's where the sun's energy is. Then we have this radiative zone that's outside of the core. And then we have the convective zone that is on top of that. Okay. The outermost layer of the sun, the surface of the sun, is called the photosphere. Okay. And as we have particles, photons and neutrinos inside the core being produced by nuclear fusion, it's going to take a long time for that material to get outwards from the inside of the sun. Also notice on the graph here the density. The density drops the entire time as you're working your way out from the from the core of the sun. So we're going to get into a little description of each of these. Just take a moment, finish up your diagram, and then we'll move up to the next slide. Alrighty, so let's talk about these different layers of the sun. First of all, the core. As we talked about with the formation of stars, you have to have that protostar reach 15 million degrees before you can have fusion occur. Well, it turns out that the temperature deep inside our sun is around 25 million degrees. And that 25 million degrees is what's needed to keep that nuclear fusion happening. Hydrogen and hydrogen combining to form helium and releasing a whole bunch of energy. The radiative zone, that's known as the middle layer of the sun, probably a little bit similar to our outer core. It's just transmitting energy away from the core itself. It takes material quite a ways and quite a while to get through that radiative zone. It's a relatively dense layer, not as dense as the core, but it transmits energy away from the core. We want to focus on is that convective zone. That convective zone is very similar to like Earth's mantle. It's a layer where the gases are mixing and there's extreme temperature differences because that radiative zone is really, really hot. But yet the outside layer of the convective zone is right next to space. So it starts to get quite a bit cooler. So that temperature causes rising and sinking convection cells. And this is what creates all of these storms on the surface of the sun. So that convective zone is a very active, turbulent layer where it's constantly bringing up hotter gases to the surface, and then those cooler gases sink back down inside and get heated up again. This all happens inside the convective zone of the sun. The photosphere, that's the actual surface of the sun. If you were to take a solar filter and look at the sun, you would see the picture on the left. You would see that nice smooth surface. If you add some other filters to your lenses, you can actually see the picture on the right, where you can actually see those storms and turbulent areas on the surface of the sun. This photosphere is about 100 miles deep. Its surface temperature, about 6,500 degrees Celsius, or if you're on the Fahrenheit scale, that's about 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The surface of the sun is covered with swirling gas storms, explosions from the surface of the sun. It's a very turbulent environment being on the photosphere of our sun. There's one more layer of the sun that is there also, and that is known as the corona. Okay? Not coronavirus, not Corona the beverage, but the corona of the sun is this ring shape that extends outward and undulates and changes from the sun's surface. Okay? The corona itself is about 1 million degrees, and scientists are a little bit mixed as to why that temperature goes up from a surface temperature of 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit out to, and then all of a sudden it moves up to 1 million degrees Fahrenheit. But the corona, it's the outermost layer of the sun's atmosphere. It's always changing in size and shape because of the turbulent surface of the sun. So the corona. We see some features that happen on the surface of the sun. One is a solar flare. So here we have this large finger, if you will, or this large flame explosion off of the surface of the sun. It's extremely high energy, high radiation. You can see at where it's white right there in the center of the screen how hot that surface area is from the sun. So those gases are coming up through the convective zone. They break through the surface of the sun's photosphere, and they have this long flare that extends off the surface of the sun. This is known as a solar flare. Another feature that we see is a solar prominence. And a solar prominence is a large hoop shape or loop-shaped gaseous feature. Sometimes it starts out as a solar flare, and then the flare actually comes back around and connects back to the sun's surface. Sometimes these rings just start out and the ring just grows larger and larger and larger as it extends outward from the sun's surface. You can see right above where the center of that loop is, you can see where that white and bright and hot layer of the sun was. So something caused an explosion from the surface of the sun, creating this gaseous loop or this solar prominence from the surface of the sun. What is this? This is a feature on the sun's surface. As you magnify this in and look at this feature here, what do you think is happening here on the surface of the sun? Well, turns out that our sun has acne at different times. It's called sunspots. And sunspots, they're dark spots on the surface of the sun. They're actually areas that are cooler than the surrounding surface. That's why they appear darker. They're not giving off as much light. They're not emitting as much light. There's not as much energy in those cooler regions of the sun's surface, so they appear darker. And sunspots are areas that can change. Sunspots are areas that actually help prove that the sun rotates, because as the sun is rotating, those sunspots move also. So that's how scientists were able to determine that the sun actually rotates, was by moving and tracking sunspots as they move along the surface of the sun. Notice this picture here, there are not any sunspots on the surface of the sun, okay? That round disk that you see, that's actually Mercury. It's in its orbit going around the sun. But sometimes the sun looks very clear, as it does in this picture here. Or if I jump on back to this one, you can see the sun has a lot of sunspots in this here. So it goes through a cycle. Sunspots follow a cycle, and you can see this cycle as you go here. All righty, those are our notes for this time. You can take a picture of your notes and insert them into your slide.